Welcome back to the Adventures of the Monad, where we look at life, the universe, and everything. This is my second recap presentation, in which I wish to go over my previous 7 presentations in total, which were all about creation. I'll start by saying, what was I talking about in those presentations? I was talking about a worldview called Hylozoics. And this worldview was given to us by a Greek philosopher called Pythagoras, who lived about 2,700 years ago and taught in a mystery school. The information that I present is part of a body of work that was given to us by an unknown person who went by the name of Henry Lawrence. And he said that the ideas he put forward were taught in that mystery school as part of a 7-stage process, of which the first 3 were made available to us in the present time. Hylozoics is about not just how the universe came into being, but about life in general, and especially about humanity's progress and evolution. But the first 7 presentations I did were all about a macrocosmic view of our universe. So why did I start at this position rather than perhaps starting with the human being, which is where most people will find most interest because it's easy to relate to? I started with this macro overview because I wanted to A, start at the very beginning, and B, to give a scaffolding into which everything else I'll say will fit. Because you can talk about, for instance, the human being, but the question you would then say was, where did this human being come from? How did he suddenly end up on the scene? So how far back do you need to go to say, well, okay, let's start from here and this is how we came into existence? So I decided to go right back to the beginning. And that beginning I called the Antiverse. This Antiverse is a state of being that is beyond creation. So we sit here in our universe, and this is creation. Well, the Antiverse is beyond that. The Kabbalists call this state of being Ein Sof. The Hindus called it Parabrahm. And I've given it the name a passive God. In other words, this state of being is not a creator, but it is from which anything can be created. Now, what are the attributes of this state of being? It is a place which has absolute density. And what do I mean by that? I mean that whatever is there, and whatever is there is called primordial matter. Note the word matter. Is so close together that there's no space. Now that is something that doesn't actually exist in our universe, because we know from our studies in science that atoms actually are practically empty space and therefore never really touch one another, even though they can aggregate together into molecules and substances. But here in the Antiverse, there is no space. So whatever constitutes matter is actually not differentiated from any other piece of matter. It is just primordial. It is before matter. And this state is then given the term limitless potential, because from this anything can come. It hasn't differentiated into anything, but it has the potential to be whatever it wants to be or whatever it can be created into. Now, if you have matter that is so close to another piece of matter that there is no space, then that means there is no space. In other words, one of the things that we have in our universe is space. You can see a space between here and there. In this state of limitless potential, there is no space. Therefore, there is no space. And also in this state, there is no time, hence the word limitless as well. So space and time are completely missing. And if there is no time, then there is no beginning. So if you go around saying, well, when did this all start, or when was the beginning? We can talk about a beginning to our universe, but we can't talk about a beginning to the Antiverse, because this particular concept is beyond time and space. It's infinite. Now, coming to our own particular universe, I use the term Ein Sof Ur, which is another Kabbalistic term which talks about a creative force that brings a universe into existence. And another word for this is boundless light. This particular concept, which I could now term a creator God, is given the name the Absolute. And so this Absolute stands between the Antiverse, which is this limitless potential, and it is boundless light, which somehow can bring something into creation, and we call that something the universe. This is just a philosophical point, but the Absolute actually looks back into the Antiverse and sees it objectively. But into the universe, that is subjective. Why is it subjective? Because the universe is basically a thought bubble within the creative potential of the Absolute. So although to us the universe is very real, to the Absolute it is subjective. We are quite literally living in the mind of God. Once you go from the Antiverse into the universe, two things happen. Firstly, because I talk about a bubble, that means a bubble has a diameter. It has a dimension. So the first thing you have in that universe is space. Space has come into existence. The other thing is that there is also time, because there was a time before there was a bubble, and then the bubble expands, and it takes time to get from a diameter x to a diameter y. Therefore, time exists in this universe. That's an important concept to keep in your mind as we progress, because time is always present no matter what level of consciousness or matter you're dealing with, there is always time. And I made a point of emphasizing this because a lot of people who do study esoterics seem to have a concept that time only exists in our material plane here, and that somehow when you get into the higher spheres of whatever, time disappears. I'm stating here and now that's not the case. Time exists in our universe, and as long as we are in the universe and we're talking about the universe, there is time. Also, there is space. There has to be, because the particles that now exist in the universe don't touch one another, therefore there is a space between them. So, what does the Absolute actually do? It imagines a universe and creates a thought bubble. This thought bubble appears in the vast sea of primordial matter. And the thing about primordial matter is not only is it infinitely dense, but it's infinitely elastic, so that it can expand to contain whatever is within it. It'll never sort of run out of space. You can't have a thought bubble that is so big that somehow the Antiverse splits. It doesn't. It is infinite. But the Absolute takes this primordial matter and transfers some of it into the universe. And that primordial matter then becomes primary matter. And we are going to call it a one atom. The name that Pythagoras gave to this one atom was a monad. The monad is the smallest unit of existence in the universe. And it is comprised of three things. Firstly, it's an atom, therefore it's made of matter. The second thing is that it's in motion. It has a spin. And the third thing is that the interaction between the matter and the motion creates a magnetic field, which we call consciousness. Now, these three things are always present and have to be present in every unit of matter. That is why you cannot have a state of consciousness by itself. Consciousness has to be linked to matter and can only exist when that matter is in motion. So, we have a universe filled with these one atoms. Where do we go from here? I've talked about an Absolute that stands at the boundary between the Antiverse and the universe. But what actually is creation within our universe? Because that Absolute isn't in the universe. We may be part of its thought bubble, but it isn't actually actively engaged in creation. It somehow transfers these primary atoms from the primordial matter into the universe, and that seems to be about it. Something else goes on that causes creation in the universe as we know it. And so here, I brought up the concept of the creator gods. And this concept has existed in literature and in, for instance, Hindu tradition. There's a concept of Brahman, who I call the Absolute, and then a trinity of creators called Shiva, Vishnu and Brahma. The Greek equivalent to those are the first, second and third logos. The logos is the word. And Brahma, Vishnu and Shiva equate to the same thing. So for the logos, let's say the first aspect. That is Shiva, and the Gnostics call that concept the Father. And this Father, or first aspect, is responsible for energy motion within the universe. And through that, it creates balance and harmony. And this is very much the role of Shiva. Shiva is the creator as well as the destroyer. And it's the relationship between those two that gives us the balance and harmony of the universe. The second aspect, or the second logos, was called Vishnu. And Vishnu represented that aspect of the motion of the monad that relates to consciousness. And the Gnostics called this the Son, S-O-N. And that aspect also has sort of an attribute, and that is love, wisdom. Whereas the attribute for the first aspect is will, or energy. We then come to the third aspect. The third aspect is called Brahma, and the word that we would call it would be matter. Although sometimes the Gnostics also call it the Holy Spirit, but that actually refers very much to within our solar system and not in the cosmic scale. The attribute attached to this particular aspect of the Trinity is divine intelligence. So what do we get from this? Well, the first thing you get is that God is not singular, but in fact a Trinity. Therefore, God is a collective. So creator gods enter the universe. Where from? Well, possibly from other universes, or possibly from a state where they've gone into suspension before they come out again to create. Because obviously you don't get a creator god from nowhere. Somehow it has to become a creator god, and how did it get there? That is the whole process of the evolution of the monad. But now let's just say we have a creator god. It's right at the top of the tree. It comes in from somewhere and is suddenly made present in our universe by the Absolute. The Absolute transfers this creative potential into the universe. And this creative potential, sitting right at the top of the, you could say, the vibrational state of our universe, has three characteristics. It's omnipresent, it's omnipotent, and it's omniscient in all parts of the universe. It is a creative force, it has these three aspects, and it is everywhere at once. But clearly, there are other levels of organization within our universe. And the creative forces that bring the entire universe into existence, or not so much into existence, but into operation, are not necessarily going to be involved in the minutiae of what goes on in galaxies and solar systems. So there are other creator gods that you could say step down the energy that comes originally from the Antiverse into the universe through the Absolute, and take that energy and put it into effect in the form of galaxies, solar systems, and planets. And so there are other Greek terms for creator gods, and one of them is a solar logos, which the physical representation in our system is the sun, but that's only just the material body of something much greater. And there is the planetary logos, of which the physical planet is again just a reflection of something much higher. But again, that is another creative force that is linked to our evolution. So here again is the concept of God as a collective rather than as a singular entity. Although there may be one monadic consciousness that is running the show at any one of these levels, it functions as a collective. And the very fact that there are a whole series of levels means that there is still a collective, even though there may be one entity in charge of any particular show at any one time. Now we've got this huge universe. How is it divided up? It's divided up into 7 cosmic planes. These planes I've given names, which are not universally accepted by all, but they're names, and that's what I'll use to define them. The names are the monadic plane, the divine plane, the spiritual plane, unity plane, mental plane, emotional plane, and physical plane. I use these 7 words because those terms repeat again and again through other subdivisions. And so those are terms you just get used to because they're going to be coming again and again at you. The planes subdivide into 7 minor planes, each within one of the 7 major divisions. This ends up then having 49 planes of matter. And you could also think of it as planes of consciousness. This number 49 is the basic unit of divisions I'll be talking through the entire series of presentations I give, because that's a good way of somehow stratifying what's going on in our universe. But the thing to think about the planes is not somehow that there's a plane up there and then there's a plane down here, but that each plane exists within each other plane, because the matter in the higher planes is more refined, vibrating at a higher level, and therefore it takes up a different amount of space as the more dense matter, and therefore it exists within it. And you'll understand why I see it like that in a minute. Each of these 49 planes themselves can then be divided into a further 7 subplanes. That has relevance when I look at our own personal planes that we live in. And then you'll see that there's another set of divisions. But for overall ways of thinking about it, we have these 49 planes, which are part of 7 major divisions. We currently, out of those 49 planes, only inhabit the lowest of the planes, the 49th plane. And out of that, we only occupy the 3 lower subdivisions of that plane that we call our senses, the world we actually live in. So you can see that we're not really sort of far up the scale that actually exists within the universe. And that should actually, make us feel humble, because humanity tends to so obviously think that we are the center and that the earth and the moon revolve around us. I mean, wasn't it always like that? What the hell was Galileo talking about? But in reality, there is this vast organization that is our beautiful universe, and we're really right at the bottom end of it. So we've got a long way to go and a lot to learn, but it's going to be an interesting journey. You notice that the number 7 is repeating itself over and over again. This is a pattern which all I can say is it works in our universe. I can't say about any other universes, but here 7 seems to be an important number. I've said that there's 49 planes. Why not say 50? Why don't you go below the lowest plane? So we come all the way down here to matter, and then why does it stop there? Well, actually, there's possibly a good reason for that. There's a concept in Christianity called the abyss. The Kabbalists call it klipoth. And it's the other end to the Antiverse, really. You've come into the universe, you've gone down as far as you can into matter, and then you seem to stop. Why? Well, for some reason, once you get to a certain degree of coldness, which is what you find in interstellar space, if you got to absolute zero, matter would actually then lose its space, would actually become incredibly dense, just like it is in the Antiverse, and would become a fluid. But it never gets there, because for some reason you can't seem to go down to absolute zero. You can get pretty close, but you can't actually get there. So there is actually an effective barrier to the descent of matter, and it stops on the 49th plane. Okay, so now let's talk about the structure of matter itself. I talked about these 1 atoms that came into the universe from the Antiverse. They are the smallest units of existence, and they are called the monad. These 1 atoms form a chain, and that chain contains, surprise, surprise, 49 atoms in total. That number comes up again, which is again a multiple of 7. These 49 atoms then form what's known as a 2 atom. That 2 atom actually makes up the next plane of matter. It's denser, and it is made up of 49 atoms from the plane above. So what is actually this 1 atom in relationship to everything else? It is a unit of, how would you call it? It's like a sort of a matrix that makes up the framework of the entire universe, and it is also a source of zero-point energy, or fohat. In fact, the Greeks called it dynamis. It sort of puts energy into the universe. If you could imagine that the Antiverse puts these primary atoms into the universe, they come in with a certain energy that comes from the Antiverse, which is limitless. And so as long as those atoms keep coming into the universe is supplied with energy. This does 2 things. It gives the energy to the universe for it to function, and it also expands the universe because you have these atoms coming in all the time, and that's why the universe is expanding. I mean, at least that's some people say, other people may disagree. But esoteric says it's expanding. These atoms, these 1 atoms occupy intergalactic space, and they are made up of just the primary atoms. But when you link them together with other atoms, you start creating the planes. So that plane 3 is made up of 49 2 atoms, which itself is made up of 49 1 atoms. So by the time you get to plane 49, you are in fact dealing with 1.34 to the power 81 atoms of monadic matter. That is an incredibly large number. I mean, to put it into perspective, we talk about there being trillions of galaxies and trillions of stars within each galaxy. This number dwarfs those numbers. I mean, it makes those numbers really small by comparison. So this is a really, really big number. And that is the number of these primary atoms which make up the smallest unit of existence in our entire universe. They go to make up the largest atom in any one of these cosmic planes, which is our 49th plane. I now want to say, or to look at the 5 grades of matter. So that we've got obviously matter that it comes into the universe, but then it actually becomes different grades of matter, and this matter or these grades is linked to consciousness rather than what plane it is on. And the 5 grades start off with obviously primordial matter, which is not in our universe, so technically you could say it's out of the equation. The first grade then is primary matter. The second is the secondary matter, then you have tertiary matter, and you have quaternary matter. What differentiates them is motion and consciousness, because primary matter is just 1 atoms, and they have a spin, but they're not conscious yet. Now, I said that you had to have consciousness, matter, and energy always present at the same time. That's true, but in the case of the primary atom, although it's not actually conscious, it is potentially conscious. Therefore, that aspect of consciousness is there, but not present yet. These atoms exist on all 49 planes and are the background of everything in our existence, so they're always there. They are the primary component of all other matter, and they deliver us energy. This matter comes into existence from the first outpouring. And I spoke earlier on about the first, second, and third logos, or Shiva, Vishnu, and Brahma. Well, the Brahma aspect, the third logos, is the matter aspect. So that outpouring, the first outpouring, comes from the third logos and brings into the universe this primary matter. Secondary matter actually starts to form after this primary matter has gone through 3 complete cycles through all 49 planes of matter. So this primary matter is circulating through the entire universe, taking energy top to bottom, top to bottom. And after it's done that 3 times, it actually stops at plane 43, which is, if you start from the bottom, 7 up, but obviously coming from the top is 43 down. And there it begins a journey from plane 43 down to plane 49. And the matter now has something more than just a spin, it has spiral motion. So it starts then to spin in a different way. It's spiralic. This happens when the second logos gives out the second outpouring. So the second outpouring is a transformation of the primary atom into the secondary atom. And it is a process by which the atom takes on a different kind of motion. So again, it's interesting. You've got that aspect of matter, you've got consciousness, but the thing that sort of has changed, it's the motion aspect. And the change of that motion somehow leads to consciousness upping itself and going into a different gear. That different gear is that this particular atom now, this the secondary atom is, or secondary matter shall we call it, is now passively conscious. Passive conscious is an interesting concept, because it's saying that although the matter itself is able to react to thought, in other words, there's something about it that you can apply thought to it and it'll react. It can only do it because there's an external stimuli. It can't do it itself. In other words, it cannot initiate its own thought, but it can respond to the thought that impregnates it. So you can do anything with it, but it cannot do anything itself. Another name for this secondary matter is elemental essence. This is a state of creation which we will discuss further and further as we go along in the series. But this elemental essence can be molded into a form known as an elemental. And this matter, this secondary matter, is actually carrying on an evolutionary process, as in fact the primary matter was, but this evolutionary process is called involution, because it starts at plane 43 and starts to move down to plane 49. And that process is going from less dense matter into more dense matter. Now that has huge consequences for us, because we are trying to evolve. We're trying to go from denser matter into more refined matter. But we need to use this secondary matter to achieve that. And I've sort of touched on it in my first 7 presentations, but in fact the next series of presentations will go into a greater detail about what's going on with the use of the secondary matter and why it's so important to us. But the upshot of all of this is that this secondary matter is dragging us down into temptation. It's something that's pulling us back. We have to use it to go up, but it's pulling in the opposite direction. And that has huge implications. Okay, so now we come to tertiary matter. Tertiary matter evolves up from plane 49 and moves back towards plane 43. What differentiates tertiary matter from secondary matter is that it has now developed a rudimentary memory, so that it can remember things and repeat them. So it hasn't got will of its own. It cannot initiate an action, but once it's programmed by something, it can then repeat that action. So it's an automated process. And this is what gives us behavioral patterns. This tertiary matter is found in physical bodies and also subtle envelopes. I talk about the subtle envelopes in great detail in the next set of presentations. And it is also part of what are known as permanent atoms and molecules. And they are effectively the memory cells of our incarnations. And again, I'll expand on this later. Another very interesting thing is that they also form the blueprint for who we are. In other words, we have a template on which we are designed, as in fact is all matter in the world down here, all the way from rocks upwards. And there's a blueprint that underlies them, and that is formed from tertiary matter. So now we come to the last type of matter, the fourth matter in the universe and fifth overall, and that is quaternary matter. So what makes this matter special is that now for the first time matter develops willpower. And this happens when the third outpouring occurs from the first logos, the logos that we can now call Shiva. And this outpouring of energy gives that monadic atom something beyond just rotary and spiral motion. It gives it cyclic motion. In other words, the thing goes in a cycle. And this potential willpower starts from rocks onwards. So rocks, plants, animals, humans, you could say beyond humans, all the way back to God. All are in fact quaternary matter. And you may say, well, where does a willpower in a rock come from? Well, actually, rocks do have it, but in a very unique way, which I will be talking about in the future presentations. But anyway, the important thing to remember is that quaternary matter is the highest form of matter in the universe. It is what will now exist from the material that we know as rocks all the way up to gods. They're all quaternary matter, and the thing that differentiates any of those lumps of quaternary matter is their level of consciousness. And they all have these three elements of motion: rotary, spiral, and cyclic. Another point that I raised in my presentations was the concept of God. Who actually is God, or what is God? I've obviously given you an explanation from a Hylozoic perspective. But I also in my presentations mentioned that, you know, when we think of gods in the normal context, we actually have to realize that they are in fact a creation of us. You know, we think what God is, and therefore God is that, as opposed to that is what God is. And so over time we've created synthetic gods. And I go on to talk about, you know, the problems with this, that in fact if we create an entity that through our thought forms has a certain energy, that entity feeds back to us what we feed to it. So it just reinforces our own particular stereotypes. I also then go on to mention that there is an element of guidance that we have that is actually watching over us. And there's no point in saying your prayers to the Absolute. That entity isn't involved in the universe at all. You could pray to those three first, second, and third logi. Are they interested in us? Absolutely not. Even to the planetary logos in charge of our planet, I doubt if that entity has time. But there is something that is listening, and I call it a guardian angel. The guardian angel is a whole stream of evolution that runs parallel to us, known as the Devic stream. And as time goes on, I describe this particular stream in greater and greater detail. So you'll come to understand what I'm talking about. But if you ever want to think about who you're saying your prayers to, it's to that guardian angel. And I will explain what that guardian angel does, and that's why you should be focusing your attention there, if you want to get a result anyway. I also mentioned in this first set of presentations that humanity is guided by more advanced beings that themselves at one time or other have been through the human kingdom, but now have progressed beyond that. And I give them the name the hierarchy. This is a term for a group of beings. There are other terms to describe them as well. But I'm just saying that so that you know that our evolution is guided by higher beings that start from the closest one to us is our guardian angel, and this hierarchy, going all the way up through the creator gods, up to Vishnu, Shiva, and Brahma, first, second, and third logos, and back to the Absolute. So in other words, there is a chain of command that governs our existence, and we are part of that. I then also wanted to recap on the fact that religion and esoterics are not actually that dissimilar around the creation myths. For example, when it says in Genesis that there was a separating of light from darkness, this, from the esoteric point of view, is the separation of the universe from the Antiverse. The Antiverse being the darkness and the universe being the light. Hence the term of the Absolute being infinite or boundless light. Genesis also talks about the separations of the waters from the waters. This is the progression of planes of matter coming out from the highest plane, plane 1, and then progressing to plane 2, plane 3, plane 4, the separation of the waters. And there's also an interesting set of phrases that are used in several religious traditions, but it all amounts to the same thing. And that is that a breath becomes a stone becomes a plant becomes an animal becomes a human becomes a spirit becomes a god. That's interesting, isn't it? There seems to be this progress that says that things start from a simpler form and go through, and that they are somehow connected. There is a passage through all of those forms. In fact, I would go and say that there are actually 3 levels of elementals below that, and below that there is primordial matter. Not primordial matter, sorry, primary matter. And then beyond that there's primordial matter. So there seems to be this movement from primordial matter through primary matter, through the first, second, third, and finally quaternary matter. And that quaternary matter is in fact where we talk about the stone, because the breath can refer to just about everything else. And in the Bible there is this concept of Jacob's ladder. That ladder refers to obviously a movement, they say, of angels up and down the ladder, but you could also think about it as the 49 planes of matter as well. And the last point I just want to mention is an analogy I gave about our lives, and about our lives being seen as a book. And you read that book and you identify very strongly with the actor in that book, and that actor is basically your persona. This is the entity you think you are. You are effectively an actor in a play, and that book lasts for a lifetime. The body you inhabit is a virtual reality suit, and it allows you to experience the 5 senses that you have in the physical plane. Why do you need this suit? If you're just a monad, why don't you just wander around as a monad? The reason for that is that the monad cannot operate in the physical plane. And when I mean the physical plane, I mean the physical cosmic plane, which itself has 7 subdivisions. Because it is absolutely too powerful. It will fry anything in the cosmic physical plane. So what it does is that it lodges itself at the top of the cosmic physical plane and then focuses its attention down into a group of 9 atoms and molecules known as a triad. And I go on and describe that in greater detail in the future as well. So I want to end here by saying that the whole macrocosmic picture I'm trying to give is that the universe is a nursery for the creation of gods. It is actually there to create more absolutes. And our current absolute is, you could consider, a master trainer. And it sets about a universe with a series of laws, which I will discuss right at the end of my series of presentations, and that everything in the universe is governed by those laws. And you stick to the laws, things go well. You disobey the laws, things have to be sorted out. And in this universe, there are basically 12 classes. Humanity at the moment is in class 4. In fact, I think in my presentation I said humanity is in class 4 out of 49 classes, and that's not strictly true. I should really be, I think about it as 4 and 12. But anyway, the point is that we are at the start of that process, but we do have to go through 49 planes, and we are in fact functioning on the 3rd plane up. So we've actually got 46 planes that we have to graduate through. So you could think of those as classes and say, yes, that is 49. And so what will humanity actually graduate into? Well, we can graduate one day perhaps to manage our own planet, and then perhaps even a solar system and a galaxy, and then eventually go off and create our own universe. In other words, the universe is a nursery to create more gods. Now that may seem sort of, something that people just don't ever think is possible for us, because our relationship to God is, well, there is a God and there is us, and there's somehow sort of a division between the two. And we hopefully will be saved, and we'll live happily ever after. I'm saying that Hylozoics makes this a bit more of a continuous process, starting from a very simple but powerful beginning of the primary atom, and then going all the way through to a quaternary atom, which has self-will when it's conscious as well. And that consciousness increases to a level whereby that quaternary atom, that monad, is capable of creating its own universe. My next series of presentations are all going to be about the human being and what constitutes us and how do we get constituted. So if you are obviously interested in the series of presentations that I've given so far, please visit my website, and the links to that will be in the description box below. And also come on to the site and leave comments to any particular presentation, and join in forum discussions. If you have questions you wish to raise, or to add your thoughts to discussions that are going on, please feel free to do that. I want to create, obviously, a community of thought, not just my thought speaking into a camera. So thank you very much.